Advisor joins me live. Danny, thanks so much for making time for us. Hope you listened to that debate just now with Richard. Just get your immediate response.
Well, we had gremlins, so I only heard a little bit of it. I mean, I think it's kind of, the ship has sunk and no regrets. I mean, the reality is that Brexit, as an economist, Brexit was always going to be an economic disaster. And it's turned out to be that way. And I've long said to people, please, would you tell me an economic benefit yet of Brexit? And to this point, nobody's actually ever come up with one. And I think the reality has to sort of hit, the reality has to hit the road right here. I mean, yesterday we got a report from the IMF giving a forecast for all the advanced and less developed countries. Guess who's worst? Yeah. The UK. Why? Well, Brexit.
So it's rare, Danny, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that economists reach consensus on some issues. There seems to be a consensus that there's a growth issue in the UK. But how much consensus is there among economists that Brexit is to blame for the UK's growth problem?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, Emily Maitlis talked about this some time ago. I mean, at the time of when the debate was on about Brexit, there were thousands and thousands of economists who basically said the same thing as I've just said. And I think there were probably 5 who got onto every TV program, essentially saying, if you like, just equivalent that the world was flat. And so basically the consensus before it happened was the same. The consensus now is the same. The only issue is how disastrous is it? I mean, the question you have to ask, if anybody thinks Brexit was a great idea, what's the explanation of why the UK is basically the sick man of Europe, the sick man of the OECD? And what explains that? There's a simple explanation, which is investments falling in the UK, mobile workers that were here, greasing the wheels of the labour market have left. And essentially, we saw data today saying the export performance of the UK was completely disastrous and also worst of in the Western world. So I don't really know what anyone's arguing about. I mean, you can do the King Canute thing, saying hold back the tide, but I mean the jury came back. The fat lady started singing. There is no debate anymore. It's an unmitigated disaster, and you can't eat sovereignty. I mean, that's as simple as it is.
Danny, I want to ask you one point that Richard brought up when I was debating just now. He said the UK doesn't have a labour issue. I think it does.
Well, sure it does. I mean, the big issue it has is that people can't afford to pay their bills, even if they're working. And why are so many people on strike? Public sector pay is so low. People are struggling to survive. Their real wages have fallen. So there clearly is a labour issue. And one of the big reasons people have retired, actually, is the jobs are not paying enough. Real pay in many jobs has actually fallen, and older people have decided the benefit of going to work is less than the benefit of not going to work. So the answer is, of course, there's an economic problem. Basically, it's about paying your bills. And obviously, we also had a disastrous government trying to trot out right-wing stuff that the Brexiteers supported. And the Prime Minister lasted 48 days. And I actually wrote a thing in July 2022 saying that this is always going to be a disaster. The bond markets, the foreign exchange markets would come after you. And boy, did they. So this is just all a set of economic policies that are a disaster.
Danny, just to end on a positive note, if we can, because I want to avoid you and I being labelled as Ramonas in all of this. Because
realists. We're realists.
One of Richard's key points, though, is it's an implementation issue of the current government. So if that is the argument to take, how much longer do we give them?
We don't give them any much longer. We know the answer.
What's the answer,
it's a bit like
what's the solution?
Well, we have to try and work out ways of making the connections to our close neighbours much greater. We have to deal with the issue of pay. We have to deal with the issue of goods and people moving across frontiers again, and basically do everything you can to reverse everything that the Brexiteers did. I mean, everything you think, every policy they did, let's just reverse it, start to allow free movement of peoples, allow goods to cross frontiers, and not have to bother with ridiculous trade deals with some Southeast Asian country that will raise GDP by 0.00001 in a decade.
And that was considered to be an overestimate. grammar as well. Yeah, Danny.
I know. I know. The zeros have it.
Danny Blanchflower, thank you very much for adding to this debate, and thank you, Richard, in the studio as well. Now, we do have more coming up on the show. Are we all at risk of losing our jobs to AI? If it's not anything else, critics say AI will lead to mass unemployment, whilst others say it will move humanity forward. We'll be talking about that next.